Greetings to all our viewers tuning in to our channel. If this is your first time here, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our deep dives into the shifts shaping our region and the world. Throughout the history of international trade, the world has often been shaken by items that seemed like mere commodities, only to be turned into powerful weapons. Oil once made the Middle East the epicenter of global conflict. Natural gas turned Europe into a hostage of geopolitical bargaining. Even rice has been wielded by Asian powers as a high-stakes bargaining chip in deadly strategic games. But few could have imagined that one day, milk, a drink associated with childhood, breakfast, and the quiet comfort of home, would become the center of a fierce trade war, one marked more by politics than economics. Images of American farmers silently dumping thousands of gallons of fresh milk onto their fields as if pouring away an entire season's worth of hard work shocked the world. But behind that wasted stream of milk lies more than just loss. It's a symbol of a deeply paradoxical policy. Washington, in its ambition to protect farmers and reshape trade, has ended up tightening the very grip around the hands that feed America's agricultural engine. Meanwhile, just across the border, Canada, with its tightly controlled supply management system, regards its dairy industry as sacred ground, untouchable, and non-negotiable. From this clash of philosophies, a battle has erupted, one that goes beyond economics to strike at the heart of national sovereignty. This milk war didn't stop at negotiation tables or trade summits. It spilled into everyday life. Into morning toast, into cups of coffee across millions of households, into family budgets that once seemed insignificant, but are now swept into the whirlwind of global trade. When a basic staple turns into a symbol of confrontation, it becomes painfully clear that trade has never been just about buying and selling. It's always been a mirror reflecting power and political calculation. To many, this story began with wasted glasses of milk, with struggling farms drowning in surplus. But look closer, and a harsher truth emerges. Excessive protectionism can turn a support mechanism into a noose. Washington thought it was shielding its farmers, but instead it pushed them to the brink of ruin. And so, when efforts to rescue America's farmers turned into a bitter act of economic self-sabotage, the United States officially fired the first shot in a trade war unlike any before, one that the world would later come to know by a short, chilling name, the Milk War. In August 2025, Washington shocked the world with a bold and unexpected move, a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, along with sweeping tariff hikes on nearly all of its major trading partners. The reasoning put forth by the White House sounded convincing at first: rebalancing trade, protecting national interests, and rescuing American farmers. But once the glossy rhetoric was stripped away, the real target became unmistakably clear: a direct strike at Canada's dairy industry. At campaign rallies, the administration made no effort to hide its intentions. They openly framed this as a crusade on behalf of American farmers. States like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where dairy farmers make up a significant voting bloc, were seen as political pressure points, key to tipping the electoral scales. Washington wanted to send a loud and clear message: we're fighting for you. But the reality was far more bitter. The American dairy sector had long been plagued by a fundamental contradiction. Production vastly outpaced domestic demand. Cold storage facilities in places like Montana and Wisconsin were overflowing with millions of gallons of milk, so much that some farms had literally run out of space. In that context, even if Canada were to throw its market wide open, it still wouldn't be able to absorb the massive surplus drowning the U.S. dairy industry. When Washington swung the hammer of tariffs, it didn't untie the knot, it only tightened the noose. Domestic milk prices didn't rise as expected, input costs soared, export markets began to shrink, struggling farms slid deeper into crisis. And the haunting images of milk being dumped onto fields not only returned but multiplied, serving as a tragic emblem of a policy collapsing under its own contradictions. But milk was only the beginning. Washington soon expanded its tariff war to steel, aluminum, and automobiles, the industrial backbone of the U.S. economy. Within a single quarter, Detroit had lost billions of dollars, while European and Asian automakers swooped in to seize market share. Workers who once believed that protectionist policies would bring secure, stable jobs now tasted the bitter truth. They were merely pawns in a larger political game. Thousands of jobs vanished. Assembly lines came to a standstill, and a wave of anger began spreading across the once thriving industrial heartlands of America. The U.S. believed that its economic might could force Ottawa to its knees, but it miscalculated one crucial point. To Canada, milk isn't just a commodity, it's a symbol of national identity. It's a shield that protects tens of thousands of farming families. It's a spiritual boundary that cannot be bargained away. When Washington launched its trade offensive, it wasn't just attacking an industry, it was striking at something sacred in the Canadian psyche. And from that very moment, Ottawa began preparing a forceful reply, a counterattack that would turn milk into a bold declaration of sovereignty, non-negotiable and fiercely defended. In response to Washington's tariff strike, Ottawa didn't opt for quiet negotiations behind closed doors. Instead, it launched a bold and symbolic counteroffensive. The Canadian Parliament passed a landmark binding law, permanently prohibiting any future government from offering the dairy supply management system as a bargaining chip in international trade talks. With that decision, Canada transformed dairy from an economic issue into a line of sovereignty. Canadians understood that if they yielded this time, it wouldn't just mean the collapse of tens of thousands of farms. It could unravel the entire rural foundation that underpins their national identity. Canada's supply management system has long served as a shield of stability. Each dairy farmer is allocated a production quota based on domestic demand, allowing milk prices to remain fair, ensuring sustainable incomes for producers while keeping costs stable for consumers. If this mechanism were dismantled, the market would be flooded with cheap imported milk, prices would crash, and countless family-run farms, the heartbeat of rural Canada, would be pushed into bankruptcy. To Ottawa, defending dairy meant defending livelihoods, culture, and national pride. But the Canadian government didn't stop at legislation. It swiftly rolled out an emergency aid package to help farmers stay afloat, expanded low-interest credit programs, subsidized animal feed, and invested heavily in dairy processing technologies. The message to farmers was unmistakable. You are not alone. No matter how fierce the storm, your government stands behind you. Alongside this domestic defense, Ottawa went on the offensive in diplomacy and trade. Rather than remain overly reliant on the U.S. market, Canada signed long-term export agreements with the European Union, Japan, and several Asian nations. Canadian milk powder, cheese, and other dairy products began to appear in growing numbers on supermarket shelves in Berlin, Tokyo, and Seoul. In fact, some countries began to view Canada as a trusted supplier, a counterweight to an increasingly unpredictable and protectionist United States. Remarkably, the crisis also achieved what many thought impossible: political unity. Rival parties that usually clashed found themselves on common ground. From the government to the opposition, from urban centers to rural towns, one message rang clear: dairy is untouchable. That rare moment of national consensus ignited a spirit of unity and resilience, turning the dairy sector into a symbol of Canadian defiance in the face of pressure from its powerful southern neighbor. And as Canada stood firm and struck back, the world began asking a deeper question. Was this really just a trade war? Or was it, in truth, a political chess game playing out on the global stage? Because if you look closely at what's happening across the border, you'll see the shadow of an approaching election, one in which milk is no longer just an agricultural product, but a pawn in the high-stakes game of power. On the surface, the milk war may appear to be nothing more than a bilateral trade dispute, Washington pressing Ottawa to open its market and make room for American dairy farmers. But look deeper, and a clearer truth emerges. This conflict was never really about milk. It was always about politics, specifically the politics of an American election. In key swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, states that often tip the balance in presidential elections, dairy farmers are more than just producers. They are voters. The image of a tough president fighting for fairness on their behalf becomes a powerful campaign tool. At rallies, rousing declarations were met with thunderous applause. We will not let American farmers be pushed around. We'll take on Canada if we have to protect our people. These words struck a chord with rural pride. But behind the glittering promises lay a harsh paradox. Even if Canada gave in, the core problem would remain unsolved. The U.S. dairy industry has long produced far more than the domestic market can absorb. Hundreds of thousands of excess gallons are generated daily, without viable outlets, without a regulatory framework. Unlike Canada, where the government uses supply management to match production to demand and keep prices stable, the U.S. lets the free market rule. The result is a never-ending cycle. Overproduction, price crashes, farm bankruptcies, followed by calls for government bailouts. Tariffs on Canada only deepen this imbalance, like trying to treat a wound with poison. That's why many analysts argue that Washington's aggressive moves were never about long-term economic policy, but rather short-term political gains. In this game, American dairy farmers became unwitting pawns, celebrated in speeches, yet left to bear the brunt of the consequences. And once the votes are counted, who remembers the abandoned fields, the herds sold off at a loss, or the rural families left with nothing? From a strategic perspective, the milk war reveals a troubling choice. Washington opting for the short-term path over sustainable solutions. Instead of restructuring the dairy sector, investing in processing technology, or finding durable answers to overproduction, it chose to antagonize a neighbor, a path fraught with risk and damaging to international credibility. It begs the question, was this ever really an economic strategy, or just a spectacle tailored for an election cycle? And as the political dust begins to settle, the real cost of this war comes into focus. It extends far beyond the farms and fields. The ripple effects reach through the entire supply chain, from Detroit, the heart of the auto industry, to every American dinner table, where families are now feeling the true cost of a war they never asked for. Once the trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada began to fracture, the aftershocks didn't stop at the dairy farms. They rippled across industries: steel, aluminum, automobiles, the very pillars that once defined the strength of North America's economy. Detroit, a city once hailed as the steel heart of America's auto industry, suddenly became a symbol of economic injury. Automakers were forced to spend thousands more per vehicle just to offset the cost of tariffed imported parts. And that burden ultimately fell squarely on the shoulders of the American consumer. A new car that once carried a reasonable price tag suddenly came with an extra $7,000 to $9,000. For many families, that meant putting off the dream of owning a new vehicle. Instead of driving a modern, fuel-efficient car, they were forced to hang on to aging, deteriorating ones. Behind every statistic lay a human story. A father who wouldn't trade in his 10-year-old minivan because he needed to save for his child's tuition. A single mother choosing to repair her worn-out sedan one more time rather than buy new, scraping together every dollar. These choices may seem small, but together they paint a suffocating picture, one where ordinary people are constantly forced to choose between basic needs and rising costs. Meanwhile, the very group supposedly at the heart of these protectionist policies, American farmers, ended up as the most painful casualties. Canada's market may have been modest, but when that door slammed shut, farmers didn't just lose an export destination, they were dragged into a spiral of soaring production costs. Many had no choice but to sell off their herds, lay off workers, or shut down entirely. Abandoned fields, empty barns, and the silence where cows once lowed became haunting symbols across America's rural heartland. People began to realize the harsh truth. The promises to save the farmer had turned into a bitter betrayal. And like a row of falling dominoes, the shock spread further. Rising steel and aluminum prices hit construction, home appliances, even canned beverages. A single can of soda, a new refrigerator, a newly built home, all became more expensive. Across America, from big cities to rural towns, from factory workers to the middle class, people felt the crushing weight of an invisible force in every monthly bill. They weren't at the negotiating table. No one asked for their opinion. Yet they were the ones paying the price for a war they never signed up for. And yet, as America reeled from crisis and division, something different was happening across the border. In Canada, a rare moment of unity emerged. From a posture of defense, they gradually shifted into a proactive stance, turning adversity into an opportunity to redefine their role on the global trade map. While in the United States, tariffs exposed deep social fractures and revealed the short-term calculations of political elites, In Canada, that same adversity became a powerful force for national unity. From a defensive stance, Ottawa quickly shifted to the offensive, turning what seemed like a crisis to endure into a chance to reshape its trade policy and strengthen national identity. Across the vast farmlands of Quebec, Ontario, and Alberta, farmers were met with a resounding message from their government: "We will not back down. You are not fighting alone." Alongside the historic law that permanently protected the supply management system, Ottawa swiftly launched an emergency financial aid package, subsidized input costs, and expanded preferential loan programs to help farms stay operational. But the plan didn't stop at survival. Canada accelerated investment in advanced dairy processing technology, transforming raw milk into high-value products like cheese, butter, and powdered milk for export. Rather than retreat, Canada began crafting a long-term strategy to assert its place on the world stage. On the international front, Ottawa didn't wait around for the U.S. to come to its senses. It forged ahead, opening new trade corridors. Agreements with the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and various Asian nations were fast-tracked. Canadian powdered milk arrived at the port of Hamburg. Canadian cheese hit the shelves of Tokyo supermarkets. Long-term contracts were signed with major restaurant chains in Seoul. All of it sent a clear message: Canada could hold its ground, so long as it diversified and leaned into the trust it had earned globally. In fact, Canada's stability and the credibility of its supply management model led many nations to view it as a reliable partner, a stark contrast to a U.S. increasingly seen as volatile and protectionist. What's more, Canada saw a surge of national solidarity rarely witnessed in its modern history. From parliament to prairie towns, from city dwellers to indigenous communities, the message was unified: dairy is untouchable. The dairy sector became a symbol of resilience, no different than a sacred part of national territory that must be defended. The sight of farmers standing tall before news cameras, voicing unwavering faith in their country, ignited a wave of collective pride that rippled throughout society. Out of that resolve, Canada didn't just preserve its dairy industry, it redefined its place in the world. It proved that a country need not be large in size or economic might to become a symbol of endurance, so long as it stands firm on core values and cultivates unity. While the U.S. spun into cycles of division and uncertainty, Canada emerged with its head held high, turning crisis into opportunity and adversity into strength. In the end, the Milk War was never just a story about trade. It was a reminder that in a world marked by constant upheaval, true strength doesn't always lie in size or power, but in conviction, in clarity of purpose, and in the ability to transform challenges into stepping stones for the future. And from this crucible, a new chapter in North America's story has begun, where neighbors once intertwined now face off as rivals in the fierce arena of globalization. The U.S.-Canada trade war began with something seemingly harmless: milk. But it quickly morphed into a deep fracture in one of the world's closest neighborly relationships. From sharing one of the longest borders and a long-standing free trade agreement, the two countries suddenly found themselves in a standoff, where every decision carried the weight of mistrust and political maneuvering. Washington believed it could use its economic might to force Ottawa into submission, but in the end, it played a game that only wounded itself. The U.S. lost credibility, lost market access, and left its citizens to shoulder rising costs. Canada, in contrast, demonstrated resilience and pride. It defended its dairy industry as if it were defending its own borders, turning adversity into an opportunity to reshape trade policy and strengthen national identity. But that steadfastness came at a cost: slower growth, higher operating expenses, and diplomatic tensions that won't easily fade. There were no true winners here, because in an age of protectionism, short-term gains often come with long-term consequences. And so, when neighbors become rivals, the entire North American region is left vulnerable, at risk of falling behind in the global race. This wasn't just a story of two nations. It was a wake-up call to the world. When trade is weaponized for politics, when the immediate demands of voters outweigh long-term sustainability, even the strongest partnerships built over decades can unravel in an instant. So now, dear viewers, we're left with one painful question: who really benefits from a war in which both sides lose? The answer perhaps lies in the path each nation chooses to take. short-term or long-term, confrontation or cooperation. And from that, each of us may draw our own reflections on the meaning of unity, of trust, and of enduring values. If you have thoughts, insights, or personal experiences to share, we invite you to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can continue with us on this journey through the stories shaping our world today.